This conference will now be recorded.
Dr. Janita Christabel, the organizing secretary, who is the backbone of this presentation. And I also welcome the coordinator, Dr. M. Nagarajan, assistant professor, who has made all the arrangements with great efforts. Also, I welcome my fellow co-coordinator, Dr. Shivabala Solanki, to this presentation. Our resource person for today, Engineer Renifla Lebanese from Belgium, is going to shower upon us with a sound knowledge in semiconductor design process, which will be very useful to us. I welcome you, sir. And I extend a very warm welcome to all the participants joined and yet to join, who is going to be benefited by this webinar. Thank you. Now, I would like to request the Organizing Secretary, Dr. G. Janita Christabel, to introduce the resource person.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Once again, I welcome you once again to the International Webinar on Semiconductor Design Process in Industries. I would like to introduce the resource person for today's webinar. Engineer Reniflal hailed from India, did his undergraduate in engineering in electronics and communication at Kapaham College of Engineering, Coimbatore. He did his MS in electrical engineering in US and information management in Belgium. And he is now working in Belgium as design engineer. I welcome you, sir. Once again, I welcome all the participants for this meeting. Participants, please mute your audio and video and listen to the presentation as the presentation starts now. Sir, now the platform is yours. You can give your presentation. Welcome, sir. Welcome for the presentation.
Yeah, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the presentation. So, yeah, so I'll be.
Wait a minute. Yeah.
Okay.
Now it's okay.
Okay. Yeah. So, yeah, I'll be giving an some overview on the semiconductor design process in industries with specific focus on the digital design. Okay. So first, I'd like to brush up some basics before going into the design process. Okay, so in the basics, I'll be just going to the logic gates, MOSFET, CMOS, clocking, and timing constraints, which are really necessary to understand the semi design process coming afterwards. Okay, and in the design process, I'll typically split them into front-end design and back-end design and explain it. Okay, so the basics. So yeah, we all know what are logic gates, right? So they typically perform the basic logic functions, and yeah, the ones on the left side are the basic logic functions. So and, not, and, or, XOR, XNOR, NAND, etc. Okay, and this and NAND, among these gates, NAND and NOR gates are called universal gates. The reason being that you can build all the other logic gates with just these NAND or NOR gates. For example, here you can see that using NAND gates, all the gates on the left side are built. This is really important because in the actual chip fabrication of a digital circuit, mostly one type of gates is used. Okay. And yeah, MOSFET or metal oxide semiconductor field effect transistor. So I believe you might have studied all those in the university. What it typically does in digital circuit is that it acts as a voltage controlled switch. For example, yeah, typically there are two types of MOS, NMOS and PMOS. So consider the NMOS. Okay, so in this, the body of the transistor is made of p-type material, meaning the majority carriers there are holes, meaning it's positive charge, and the source and drain are made of n-type material. So the majority carriers there are electrons. So consider you connect a power supply like a DC battery or something between source and drain. So it doesn't, okay, there won't be any flow of current, right? So because whenever there is a P and N close to each other, so there will be a barrier formed here, and there will be a barrier formed here, and there is no way for the electrons to flow from here to here. Okay, so in that case, so if you want the flow of current from here to here, there should be something connecting this and that. Okay, so when you apply a positive voltage to the gate and with respect to the body, meaning when you connect the body to the ground and gate to a positive voltage higher than the threshold voltage of the barrier, what happens is, so when you apply a positive voltage here, all the holes in this p-type material, which is the majority carriers in the p-type material, gets attracted to this terminal, meaning it gets pushed away from the from near the silicon dioxide, and then minority carriers here, which is the electrons, get attracted here. Okay, so what happens here? A small channel of minority carriers, which is the electrons, gets formed, and so there will be a flow of current from here to here. Okay, so when you apply a positive voltage, what happens? Typically, a channel is formed, and it's like a switch. So when you apply a voltage, there is a flow of current. So it's like a switch. So it's a voltage controlled switch. Okay, and in the PMOS, and in the PMOS, it's the opposite. Okay, so the body is n-type, so the majority carriers here is electrons, minority carriers is holes, but here it's p-type, so you need a channel made of holes in order for a flow of current here. Okay, so when you connect the gate to a negative voltage with respect to the body, meaning when the body is at 5 volt and the gate is at 0 volt, for example, all the holes all the holes get pushed away and get attracted here, and the electrons get attracted here. So there will be a small channel formed. So when you represent the same thing, what I said, like voltage control switch as a digital representation, it will look something like this. Like in NMOS, when the gate is at logic 0, it means that there won't be a channel, so it's switched off. When the gate is at logic 1, meaning a voltage higher than threshold voltage, it's like a switch is on. In the PMOS, it's the exact opposite. Okay, and digital circuits are typically made of CMOS. CMOS is complementary metal oxide semiconductor. So typically it consists of one PMOS and one it's equal number of PMOS and NMOS. Okay, for example, and the simplest CMOS is an inverter. Okay, inverter is the NOT gate. Okay, so this is the simplest CMOS. What it has is a PMOS and an NMOS. So for example, consider A is the input. The input is logic 0. Okay, when the input is logic 0, the PMOS gets turned on and the NMOS gets turned off, like we saw on the previous slide. This gets turned on and this gets turned off when the input is logic 0. So when this gets turned on, it means that there is a connection between VDD, which is logic 1, to the output, but there is no connection from here to here. So as a result, what happens? The output will be logic 1. So when the input is logic 1, this gets turned on and this gets turned off. So it will be pulled to the ground and the output will be logic 0. The reason why we use CMOS for digital circuits is that it allows for the output to have a full swing, meaning when it's logic 1, it will directly go to the VDD, and when the output is logic 0, it goes to the ground. Okay, and yeah, like I said in the previous slides, NAND and NOR gates are called universal gates. Typically, in a in a digital chip, all the gates will be made of either NAND or NOR, but NAND is more preferred than NOR. The reason being that NAND gate is typically faster than NOR. That's because that's typically because so when two transistors are connected in series, the delay is the sum total of the two transistors, and when they are connected in parallel, the delay of the transistor is the worst case of that. So and NMOS is faster than the PMOS. That's because NMOS, the channel is made of electrons. Electrons move faster than holes. Okay, so as a result, NMOS is faster. So it's okay to have NMOS in series, but preferably less PMOS in series. So NAND gate has NMOS in series and PMOS is in parallel, so the delay will be less, and so NAND gate is faster. So that's kind of preferred for digital circuit design. Okay, and then the next concept which I like to brush up is clocks. So clocks in digital circuit are used to synchronize the whole digital circuit. Okay, and clock, for example, yeah, when you see a laptop specification or a mobile phone specification, you see like the processor runs at 2.5 gigahertz or 1.8 gigahertz, right? So that gigahertz is the clock rate, which is the speed of the frequency of the clock, which controls the circuit. So faster the clock rate, faster the processor typically. The reason being the clock rate influences how fast the logic computes something, and also it influences power consumption, meaning when there are more transitions between logic 0 and 1, the power consumption increases. So when the clock rate is higher, when the process is running at a higher speed, there will be more transitions, and so the power consumption will be higher. Okay, and this is a D flip-flop. So this is a D flip-flop, and you can, yeah, digital circuit, in a digital circuit, you have D flip-flops everywhere in the circuit. That's typically because how D flip-flop works is, during the positive edge of the clock, whatever value is there in the data will get stored here. So it's like a 1-bit memory, which stores the data during the positive edges of the clock, and it will store, latch it at the time, and it will be available at the output. Okay, and the next topic is timing constraints. So this is a really important concept to understand lots of design decisions, and also frequency constraints, like how fast a processor can run, and that is kind of defined by this. So okay, let's take the D flip-flop from the previous diagram. Okay, so it has a clock. So all during the positive edge of the clock, it's supposed to store the data which comes into the D flip-flop, right? And it will be available at the output. Okay, so during the positive edge of the clock, whatever the data is there should be stored and it should be available at the output. But then there is a constraint on that. The thing is, for the D flip-flop to store it properly, the data should be available for some time before the clock edge. That some time is called setup time, and the value should hold, meaning the data should remain constant for some time after the positive edge of the clock. That's called hold time. Okay, this should not be violated. If we don't respect these timing constraints, what happens is it goes into an unstable state, so you cannot be sure that the output coming out of the flip-flop, meaning what is stored by the flip-flop, is the right value. Okay, I'll explain you with an example for this. So consider this tiny circuit. Okay, so here we have 3 inputs, A, B, and C. The output we want is A plus B multiplied by C. Okay, so so in a digital circuit, first what we do, we latch it. So we have D flip-flops with clock. So during the first clock edge, what happens? The data from A and B A, B, C, and C will get stored in the flip-flop and will be available on this side, okay? And during the second clock edge, what happens? The added value will get stored here, the C will get stored here, and during the third clock edge, clock positive edge, the output should be available, okay? But for this to happen properly, the adder logic should be designed in such a way that the setup time of this and hold time of this is respected, meaning the value, the added value should be available before the setup time, and it should remain constant for at least hold time after the edge of the clock. So it should be made sure that this adder logic is fast enough that it doesn't go, it doesn't last, it doesn't take too much time. It should finish before the second clock edge, but also before the setup time. And also during the second clock edge, consider the value here changes. Still, this should hold the value for the hold time after the clock edge, okay? If that is not respected, we cannot be sure that the value which comes out of here is the correct added value. So if we cannot be sure, we cannot be sure that the output is correct, right? So the whole thing, whole chip is a waste, because you cannot be sure that the result is correct. So that's exactly why we should respect the timing constraints, and that this timing constraints is setup and hold time is determined by the transistors used in the gates, like what is the what is the VDD used, what is the what is the width of the transistor. So when we see the processor specification for a mobile or something, we hear terms like, okay, it's a 10 nanometer processor, 14 nanometer processor, right? That's typically the channel width, and smaller the width, the faster will be the the transistor, okay? So so when we go for higher speed, we typically prefer smaller transistors. And we'll go into the design process now, okay? So the design cycle looks something like this, okay? So there is the product specification where we define what is the product which we are going to do, and then the architecture will be like, okay, how are we going to design this? It's like okay, when you are building a house, you have the architect who designs the house, right? Like how do you how big should the hall be, how big should the bedroom be, and something like that. So the chip architecture is something like, okay, what are the sub blocks in it, and how do we arrange it, and how do we connect it, and stuff like that, okay? And then the logic design is typically the design phase, where you typically design the gate level logic and stuff. And then the physical design is the it's called layout. So how is it arranged in the chip? How is the gates arranged in the chip? Okay. And so it's typically the ASIC design cycle can be divided majorly into front-end design and back-end design. So I'll first start with the front-end design. Okay, product specification, the first step. So usually it's done by product managers who will decide what kind of what is the semiconductor IC supposed to do. So okay, let's take an example. Okay, we will make a small adder which just adds two 4 bits. Okay, so it's supposed to add, so what is it supposed to do? It's supposed to add two 4-bit numbers. Okay, and also, so the product specification would look something like this. Okay, so it's like, okay, it's supposed to add 4 bits, and it's supposed to do 100 million additions per second. So when you have something like this, it's that, okay, so if you want to have 100 million additions per second, it means that it should run at least at 100 megahertz clock frequency. Okay, so if you are running at that speed, you should think about how you are going to design it, like, and also what power constraints, like how much power it should consume to do this many multiplication additions per second. So these things will play a major, like this. Okay, the first point, for example, it's supposed to add 4 bits. That plays a major role in defining the architecture. But these 2 points will play a major role in choosing what type of transistor, like what is the channel width you are going to choose, and how are you going to clock it. For example, if you want to reduce the power of a whole processor, there are ways like, okay, if you are not going to use this sub block at this moment, so you can just switch it off, or having options like that. Okay, and then the architecture phase. Here there will be a lot of discussions about how do we typically implement it. So for example, in our 4-bit adder circuit, so what is it supposed to do? It's supposed to have 4 sub blocks, typically 4 full adder circuits. Okay, so something like that. So there will be a lot of discussions on how we are going to implement it and what is the block level design, and everything will be documented. Okay, and then next is the logic design. This is typically the phase where the architecture is typically mapped into a logic. Okay, but then for that, we just like you have C, C++, JavaScript, and all those programming languages, there is a specific programming language used for designing ICs. Okay, it's called hardware description languages, and there are 3 popular at this time, specifically in digital: the Verilog, VHDL, and System Verilog. Okay, but we don't typically program at the gate level, meaning, so when you are designing a small circuit like a counter or something, you typically use gates to design it, right? But then these hardware description languages and the software tools associated with them are capable of converting a high level functional description into gate level. Okay, so we typically program it at a functional level. For example, if it's an adder, you typically say that, okay, it's going to add something like that. I'll give you an example. Okay, so this is a tiny module like the adder function, which I said, like it's supposed to do 2 4-bit adders. You see here, this is a Verilog HDL. So it looks something like this. You have the inputs clock A, B, output S, and also carry out. Okay, so on these, here these are registers, which means these are like D flip-flops, and these are like wires. So here, for example, I'm saying that, okay, all the inputs should be latched at the positive edge of the clock, and the same here for the outputs. So, and then these are the full adder modules, which I am calling and passing in the values and getting the output from. So this is a really small one, but for consider a huge processor, it will have so many blocks like memories and encryption, decryption, and all those things. So you typically program separate modules for them and then integrate them into a block. Okay, and then there is a synthesis stage. The synthesis, what happens is this hardware description language code is converted into a gate level netlist. So gate level and transistor level netlist, which means that typically this programming language is converted into gate level logic and also transistor level logic. Okay, and this software, what it does, it not just converts it, but also, okay, we already would have some information on what transistors which we will use in the fabrication and what type of gates we will use, right? So based on that, it will take, there will be information files on what is the delay of this transistor, how fast can it go from 0 to PDD, and how much power it consumes and stuff like that. Okay, so this software converts them into gates, and also from the information of the gate delays, physical dimensions, etc., they do a trade-off. Okay, so okay, they do a trade-off, meaning, okay, the same logic can be implemented in several ways. Okay, so you can implement for example, a multiplexer consider that there are 4 inputs, you want to choose one input from it. It can be implemented in several ways. So these software tools are capable of doing a trade-off between, okay, which is the best possible combination of this to generate the gate level netlist, to generate the gate level diagrams. But then once that is done, and as engineers, when we see that, okay, this can be implemented in a better way because it's better for our timing constraints or the frequency which we run it, we can actually override and change the logic if we want it. Okay. And then there is the logic verification stage. So okay, you have a design. So how do you know that it's working as expected? Okay. So for that we do logic verification. The thing is, if you don't verify it properly in the beginning, you cannot do some after you manufacture the chip, because it costs like millions of dollars to fabricate a chip. Millions of dollars to typically do the fabrication, because you do the fabrication in huge numbers. It makes up for the cost, but otherwise it's really hard to expensive to go for a fabrication. And then if you find a fault in that, you cannot change it. The money invested is lost. Okay, so you have to do a lot of verification in this logic verification itself. And for typically consider that in a project, consider that there are 5 designers involved, 5 logic designers. Then at least there would be 10 to 15 verification engineers. That's because that much effort will be needed to verify the different scenarios in which the chip is supposed to work. Okay, and there are typically 2 types of verification. Like there are several methodologies, but two of them are really popular. One of them is the functional verification. The other one is a formal verification. In functional verification, you typically check, okay, this is the function it's supposed to do. Is it doing as expected? Okay, and then there is a formal verification. Formal verification is, okay, like I said in the previous slide, the same logic can be synthesized in several ways. Okay. So in the formal verification, what is done is typically different versions of the same logic is synthesized, and then they are simulated and compared. Okay, is all these logics working the same? Okay, if there are something in our design which is not, which is allowing different implementations to work differently, then it means that there is some issue in the way we designed it. Okay, and for functional verification, UVM, it's called UVM. It means universal verification methodology. So that's a really popular method of doing functional verification. Typically, how functional verification is made is done is something like this. Okay, consider this as the chip. The top module is the chip design. Okay, chip, the logic. Okay, and inside that there are several submodules. Okay, and consider this outer box as the verification environment. What you typically do is, so if it's an adder, okay, the input is just A and B, right? So you generate different values for A and B, but consider a processor or something, or consider a network chip. So you typically generate network-like input in the verification environment, and then pass it to the design. Okay, and then you also get the output. You also create a equivalent software model and scoreboard. Scoreboard is like a comparison implemented between. Scoreboard is Scoreboard is like, okay, you compare the values from the design with the software model. What software model is? Okay, consider the adder circuit. Okay, the software model for adder circuit is just A plus B. Okay, so you typically, what you do, you pass the input to the adder circuit, get the output, and in the software you just add 2 numbers and see if the output from here is the same as what you would expect from the software. So like this, you also make models for every submodules, and throughout the process, you take the input to the submodule, compare the output with the software. So as a result, you'll be sure that the whole chip works as expected and each of the submodules work as expected. So once all the logic verification and everything is done and it seems like it's okay, the whole design is sent to the backend engineer. So backend in the backend design, what happens? The first step is the floor planning. Okay, so it's like you have several. It's very similar to how house is designed like that. So you already have some plan from the architecture phase. You kind of put it into the chip, like, okay, this is the number of gates in this block. This is the number of gates in this block. So it will occupy this many area in the chip. So you already know all those things. Based on that, you arrange it in a best possible way, in such a way that it's easy to connect different subblocks which are supposed to be connected to each other, and also it meets the area requirement. So when you make a chip, there will be usually an area requirement. Okay, the chip should be this size. It cannot go beyond this size. Okay, so it should, it's arranged in the best possible way to do that. And there are software tools which help us do that. And then the next stage is the placement and routing. Okay, so here what happens, all the logic which we have got from the logic gate level netlist, and also the transistor level stuff which we got from the synthesis, those will be layout for them will be laid. Okay, so you can imagine layout like, okay, how those transistors will be put on the chip. Okay, so a layout will be made for them. That's called placement, and there will be the routing. Routing is typically how are the different blocks connected, how are the different sub blocks connected, and also a clock, and also the clock tree synthesis. Okay, so clock tree synthesis is a really important step, because like I said in the timing constraints, so all throughout the chip, the timing constraints have to be respected. They cannot be violated. So in order for that to happen, the clocks should be distributed to all the parts of the chip in a very efficient way, so that there is not much delay in the clock, for example. So consider a chip which is like 5 centimeter into 5 centimeter size, okay? And then consider that the clock is coming from one end of the chip to the other end of the chip. And consider that the chip is running at 1 gigahertz speed. When a clock speed is 1 gigahertz, it means that the clock, there is a positive edge at every 1 nanosecond. Okay, so that's a really fast thing, right? So if the clock is going from one end of the chip to the other end of the chip in a 5 centimeter, it still takes some time, and that delay could cause timing violation. So in order to efficiently distribute the clock, there are several algorithms to do that, and for this specific design of for the chip which you are designing, you have to choose, okay, how do you distribute the clocks. So that is also done in this stage, and I'll give a better explanation of how the placement works. Okay, so for example, this diagram here is just the layout of a full adder. It just adds one bit, and that looks like this. Okay, and this is a really small controller which has an adder, RAM, shifter, etc. Okay, so it becomes really complicated. So instead of explaining for the adder, I'll just explain it for the NAND gate. Okay, so the NAND gate looks like this in CMOS. So it has 2 PMOS in parallel to each other and 2 NMOS in series to each other. Okay, so this is the logic for an AND gate. We also know that the cross section of NMOS and PMOS looks like this. So NMOS look like this and PMOS look like this, but this is the cross section, meaning if you take a transistor and cut it vertically into half, it looks like this. So it's like you are looking it from the side, but layout is something like you are looking it from the top. Okay, so in this diagram, for example, if you look at this PMOS from the top, how will it look? So it will look something like a square which is which is of p-type material, which is this green thing, and then there is this n-type well, which is this orange colored thing, and then you have the silicon dioxide and polysilicon layer. Okay, this is the polysilicon gate. This is the polysilicon gate. So it's like looking the transistor from the top. But this and here, if you see, the input A is connected to the gate of PMOS and NMOS, right? So here the A is connected to, this is a PMOS and this is an NMOS. So the NMOS is connected to the ground, and these are two transistors in series. Typically, this is the source. This part of this is this, and this part is this is the gate, and then this is the top end of the NMOS, which is connected to the drain part of the PMOS. So this is the layout for an AND gate. Consider chip with billions of transistors. So it will become really complicated, but it's how it is. And then after the layout stage, you typically do a physical and timing verification. Physical verification includes steps like design rule check, layout versus schematic open and short. So design rule check is like, okay, you, for a specific type of transistor and specific type of design, there are several design rules. Okay, for example, what is the closest distance you can put two transistors together, and stuff like that. So those rules will be checked during the design rule check. During the physical, during the layout versus schematic, typically you simulate the transistor level diagram, which is the schematic, and compare it with the layout with level. So you give inputs to the schematic and see what is the output, and you give inputs to the layout and see what is the output. Okay, and in the open and shorts test, you typically check if there are any open in the open circuited logic inside the layout, or short circuited logic inside the layout. Timing verification typically checks if the chip is capable of running at a specific frequency. So we already mentioned about the timing constraint, the setup and hold time, right? So with this layout design, does it meet all the timing constraints for the specific frequency at which we are going to run this chip? Okay. So, and then and then there is the, once you have the layout, you so it will be taped out, meaning it will be sent to the fab for fabrication. Okay. So like I said, from here, this is like the top level view of the chip. So here you have different layers, right? You have the metal, the blue color is the metal. You have P well, this represents N substrate. This represents P well and stuff like that, right? So from the layout of the chip, masks are made. Okay, for each layer of the chip, your masks are prepared, and the mask is like a stencil. Okay, so what do you do with the stencil? You have the so you just put it over paper and you can draw anything on it, right? So it's like that. So you, during the fabrication process, the masks are like the stencil for the fabrication. You take a substrate, which is like the silicon, and then you put wherever you want to put an N well in the chip. Okay, you put the mask over it and dope it with N-type material, and then wherever you want to put it, put the P well, you put the stencil for it, which means you put the mask for it and you do the doping. So these masks are like the stencil for the fabrication. So each masks are used for each layer. So wherever you want to have the gates, you put the mask for the gates, and then deposit its polysilicon layer and stuff like that. Okay. Yeah. So this is the last step. So after, once the design is completed, these will be sent to the fab where they will create the masks and do the fabrication. And creation of masks is a really expensive affair. So that's why, meaning consider processor. So it and you had a design flaw, and after the mask has been created, you want to make some design changes. You cannot do that. The thing is, the making the masks alone costs like couple of $1 million to do. So that's exactly why you have to do all the verification before and spend so much effort, so that the verification, so that we can be sure that everything works as expected before it goes to the fabrication. Yeah, that's it actually for me. This is the whole design process actually. If you have questions, you can ask. I'll check the chat.
Those who have questions, please unmute your microphone and you can ask. After the layout of fabrication, how it will be looking? Do you have any slides for that? Actually,
no, but I have a link actually.
This link you can just expand it and explain.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So okay, what happens in the fab is, okay, like I said, yeah, like I said, we typically they typically create masks for different layers, and then first you take the substrate and then put a mask for the envelope and do the doping there. So envelope meaning, okay, you want to have a, okay, wherever there is supposed to be a PMOS, there will be the body will be made of M-type material, right? For wherever there is a supposed to be a NMOS, the body is supposed to be made of P-type material. So you have a mask for the mask. It's a stencil-like thing for wherever you want the envelope, and mask for the wherever you want the PML. So you first do the put that mask and then do the put the P-type material so that it diffuses and forms the well, and then do the after forming the wells, you coat the whole chip with silicon dioxide, which is like the insulator, and then take the mask which you created for the gates, because the silicon dioxide is supposed to be there only wherever the gates are there. Okay, the gates are typically made of silicon dioxide and then a polysilicon layer, right? So you coat the whole chip with silicon dioxide and then create a mask with empty spaces for all the places where there isn't supposed to be the gate. Okay, and then you expose it to acid to do etching, which is kind of like described here. So you expose it to acid to remove the silicon dioxide in those places. So once the silicon dioxide there is removed, then that area will be exposed, right? And after that, you put a polysilicon layer on the same places where the gates are there, and then there is the metal layer. So you take the mask for the metal layer, which is like, you see the slide, all the blue stuff here. That's like the connection between the chips, and also the connection for the clocks, and everything will be made of metal. So you take the mask for that. Yeah, you take the mask for that and put it over the chip, and then do the like, it's like a spray painting thing, but you typically coat the whole thing with a metal layer, but then it will just get deposited on the places where it's supposed to be. So like that, and also in the design there will be, it can have multiple layers of metals, like 2, 3 max. So yeah, it depends on the complexity of the chip. So that's the short of the fabrication process. Any other questions from the designs? Any other more explanation needed for any of the steps described here?
Hello.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have one question, Mr. Ebenezer.
Yeah.
Can you hearing me?
Yeah.
Are you hearing?
What is the question?
Yeah, actually, that hardware description language you are explained. Yeah, can we use Java language as a hardware description language?
No, as
Because
of now,
actually
no.
that.
So as of now, most of the tools support only Verilog, VHDL, and System Verilog. But then recently there are some new tools coming up, but not to use Java. There is something called it's called HLS, which is high level synthesis, which allows using high level languages more like there is a language called System C, which is very similar to C, which is typically C using extra library. So it does allow, you can say it does allow you to make a hardware design with C language, but it's called System C. It's a library of C, which is similar to C, but it limits like you design it based on some transaction level way of programming, but it does allow to synthesize C language. But that is still not fully used in most companies. Like most companies, there are some companies which are starting to use it, and it's becoming more popular. But probably in like 10 years, you can expect that you should be able to design a hardware with C, and then it should convert it. But as of now, System C is still a little different from C.
Yeah, actually that I hear that most of the embedded programming language they're mainly developing by using C and C++. But why not preferred to Java? Because we can Java is mainly for developing for machine platform independent language, correct?
Yeah.
But why not prefer to that embedded level in Java? All are prefer to that C and C++.
I think
why they are not preferred to?
Yeah, the thing is, in order to run Java, you need a JVM, right? Java Virtual Machine running on it already, right?
Yeah.
But then most of the embedded, okay, that in embedded programming, it's not linked to this topic, but in embedded programming, there are typically two types of levels. So one is the bare metal, bare metal, and the other one is the something with a operating system running on it. So when you already have an operating system running on it, for example, like Raspberry Pi or in several other products like Texas Instruments, BeagleBone and stuff, there the thing is you already have an operating system, Linux or some embedded operating system running on it. So in that operating system, you can run the JVM actually. So you have a compiler to run it. But in a pure, like if there is a really small microcontroller used in an embedded system, consider consider a microwave oven or something which is like an old one. So that has a microcontroller in it. Okay, so there, and you won't be typically running an operating system. You will typically when you write in C code or C++, the embedded programming, what the compiler does is it just converts it into a bit file, which is like a binary version with like the opcodes and stuff. Like in the 8085 processor and stuff, you might have studied done the opcode and operation code and stuff, right? So it kind of converts it into that and loads it into the memory, and the processor directly uses the kind of like the opcode like directly uses the information from the memory as instructions. It considers them as instructions and then executes it. That's all the small microcontrollers do. They don't have an operating system running on it. That's why you don't have mostly program it in Java. But then I think there should be compilers which will kind of internally convert it into opcodes and stuff, but I'm not sure.
Okay. Another one question.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually that you are explaining some gates, correct? Logic gates.
Yeah.
Different gates are you explained. Yeah, very well.
Mhm.
And based on the gates, I have one question. Yeah, what is the thermal capacity of gates? Is there any gates is a fixed of thermal capacity? For example, AND gate, OR gate, NOT gate, and so many gates are there. Is there any fixed capacity of thermal conductivity? This gate only consuming that this kind of capacity of thermal. That is why I'm
Yeah.
asking you.
Yeah. The thing
Is
is,
there any thermal capacity can we see that different from one gate to another gate?
yeah, it typically depends on the construction of this gate. Like the thing is, okay, I'll explain something. For example, the reason why we use NAND gates everywhere is because if you want to make a yeah, for example, if you want to make an AND gate in a
Okay.
CMOS directly without using an AND gate, it will typically have more transistors than the NAND gate. Okay, and this thermal, okay, how much heat does it produce? That typically depends on the properties of the transistor which is used in it. Okay, so for example, if you consider mobile processor which came this year, they say that it's a 7 nanometer FinFET process. Okay, FinFET is a different type of MOSFET, and it has its own properties of how much heat it will generate, how much power it will consume. For example, if you consider a 14 nanometer CMOS processor, 14 nanometer definitely generates more heat and more consumes more power than a 7 nanometer. So that typically depends on the type of transistors used and the number of transistors. And we use NAND gate to make sure that the number of transistors overall in the chip is as less as possible. And NAND gates are faster. That's also another reason. So typically, if you're using different gates, different types of gates, you'll typically end up using more transistors overall, and that will increase the heat production and stuff. That answers your question.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Anybody who has any other question, please post the questions. So we have come to the conclusion part, and I now request Dr. Nagarajan to give us the vote of thanks. Dr. Nagarajan.
Yeah. So, good morning to all. Thanks. Principal, respected resource person, respected organizing secretary, respected co-coordinators, and the respected participants. It is my privilege to give vote of thanks in this occasion. I, on behalf of the Physics Department in Sudarnar University, Constituent College, Kanyakumari, I give a very hearty vote of thanks to the principal. I must mention deep sense of appreciation for our principal for inspiring us. I would like to thank our first person, Engineer E. Reniflal, for giving us many ideas. Thank you, sir. Next, I would like to thank our organizing secretary, Dr. G. Janita Cristobal, HOD, for your involvement in conducting the program. Thank you, madam. Next, I would like to thank the co-coordinators, Dr. M. J. Gerald Vijit Gilda and Dr. S. Sivabala Solanki, for your involvement and constant support. Thank you. Finally, I would like to thank all the participants for your kind cooperation. Thank you. Thank you, Wonderful.
It's again, I have to thank everyone for participating in this international webinar. And I hope that you have been benefited by this seminar. And we want your feedback forms to be filled and sent to us. As soon as you send it to us, we'll be issuing the e-certificate and it will be sent to your registered emails. If you did not get any report or reply from us, please contact us and we are ready to. Once again, I thank all the organizers, coordinators, and my colleagues from my department and all the participants, especially the resource person for giving a very nice presentation. Thank you one and all. And I think we'll close the session now. For your feedback, please go to the chat box and there is a link given. And the link you can connect and send now. Otherwise, we hope that in the WhatsApp group also, we will give you the feedback forms later, if it is needed. Nagarajan sir?
Yeah, yes, madam. We can.
Nagarajan sir,
Yeah.
can we give that the WhatsApp group also?
Sure. I will send that link in the WhatsApp group. Then they can fill it easy. Yeah. Sure. You can proceed, madam. Okay. Then. Okay. See you.
Thank you one and all for your cooperation.